We were not alone in being poor. Times were hard in the South, much harder for most than for us, as our father often reminded us. Our region was deep in a depression long before the rest of the country felt it. Indeed, it had never had real prosperity, only spotty surges of easy money. But even the bank did not know, and it knew plenty, how little money we managed on those years. It got worse instead of better as time passed. And there came a winter when my younger sister and I, who were in Baltimore preparing ourselves to be a great pianist, me, and a great actress, her, felt we needed to be at home. We had been supporting ourselves in our schools, but even so, we felt that the parents needed us. It was our barter year. Dad would take eggs to town, swap them for flour or cornmeal or coffee, and do it so casually that nobody suspected it was necessary. They thought he was so proud of his wife's leghorns that he wanted to show their achievements to his friends at the store. Eggs from the hens, 3 pigs that he had raised, milk and butter from the cow, beans he grew and dried, and apples from a few old trees already on the property. That was about it. It was enough. For Mother could take cornmeal, mix it with flour, add soda and buttermilk and melted butter, a dab of sugar and salt, and present us with the best hot cakes in the world. Her gravy made of drippings from fried side meat with flour and milk added and crushed black pepper would have pleased any great cook. And when things got too dull, my sister and I would hitch up 2 feisty mules to the wagon and go for a wild ride, as one wanted to over the clay winter roads. Nevertheless, the 2 of us had agreed to skip Christmas. You don't always have Christmas, we kept saying to each other. Of course not, the other would say. We had forgotten our father, and that year of austerity, he invited the chain gang to have Christmas dinner with us. The prisoners were working the state roads, staying in 2 shabby red railroad cars on a siding. Our father visited them as he visited all his neighbors. That night after he returned from a 3-hour visit with the men, we heard him tell Mother about it. She knew what was coming. Bad place to be living, he said. Terrible, not fit for animals, much less, he sighed. Well, there's more misery in the world than even I know, and a lot of it is unnecessary. That's the wrong part of it. It's unnecessary. He looked in his wife's dark eyes. She waited. Mama, he said softly, how about having them out here for Christmas? Wouldn't that be good? A long silence. Then Mother quietly agreed. Dad walked to town, we had no car, to tell the foreman he would like to have the prisoners and guards come to Christmas dinner. All of them? Asked the chain gang foreman. We couldn't hardly leave out any of the boys now, could we? Replied Father. Close to noon on Christmas Day, we saw them coming down the road, 48 men in stripes with their guards. They came up the hill and headed for the house. A few laughing, talking, others grim and suspicious. All had come. We'd helped Mother make 2 caramel cakes and 12 sweet potato pies and a wonderful backbone and rice dish. And there were hot rolls and Brunswick stew and a wash tub full of apples, which our father had polished in front of the fire on Christmas Eve. It would be a splendid dinner, he told Mother, who looked a bit wan, probably wondering what we would eat in January. While we pulled out Mother's best china, piecing out with the famous heirloom fish plates, our father went from man to man, shaking hands, and soon they were talking freely with him, and everybody was laughing at his funny, and sometimes, on the rare side, stories. And then there was a hush. and we in the kitchen heard Dad's voice lifted up. And it came to pass in those days. Mother stayed with the oven. The two of us eased to the porch. Dad was standing there reading from the Gospel of Luke. The day was warm and sunny, and the 48 men and their guards were sitting on the grass. 2 guards with guns in their hands leaned against trees. 8 of the men were lifers. 6 of them in pairs had their inside legs locked together. 10 were killers. 1 had bashed his grandma's head. 2 had robbed banks. 3 had stolen cars. 1 had burned down his neighbor's house and barn after an argument. All were listening to the old words. When my father closed the Bible, he gravely said he hoped their families were having a good Christmas. He hoped all was well back home. Then he smiled and grew hearty. "Now, boys," he said, "eat plenty and have a good time. We're proud to have you today. We would have been a little lonely if you hadn't come. Now let's have a Merry Christmas." The men laughed, and finally all were laughing and muttering "Merry Christmas," half deriding, half meaning it, and my father laughed with them, for he was never unaware of the absurd, which he seemed deliberately sometimes to whistle into his life. They were our guests, and our father moved among them with grace and ease. He asked them about their families, telling them a little about his. One young man talked earnestly in a low voice. "I heard my father say, 'Son, that's mighty bad. We'll see if we can't do something about it.'" When Mother said she was ready, our father said, "Son," who was one of the killers, "go help my wife, won't you, with the heavy things?" And the young man said he'd be mighty glad to do it. There was one in for raping and another for robbing a bank, and they said they'd be pleased to help too, and they went in. My sister and I followed, not feeling as casual as we hoped we looked. But when 2 guards moved toward the door, my father peremptorily stopped them with, "The boys will be all right." And the boys were. They came back in a few minutes bearing great pots and pans to a serving table we had set up on the porch. My sister and I served the plates. The murderer and his 2 friends passed them to the men. Afterwards, the 2 bank robbers and the arsonist said they'd be real pleased to wash up the dishes. But we told them no one should wash dishes on Christmas, just for them to have a good time. That evening, after our guests had gone back to their quarters on the railroad siding, we sat by the fire. The parents looked tired. Dad went out for another hickory log to, quote, "keep us through the night," laid it in the deep fireplace, scratched the coals, sat down in his easy chair by the lamp. He said, "We've been through some pretty hard times lately, and I've been proud of my family. Some folks can take prosperity and can't take poverty. Some can take being poor and lose their heads when money comes. I want my children to accept it all, the good and the bad, for that is what life is. It can't be wholly good, and it won't be wholly bad." He looked at our mother sitting there tired but gently involved. "Those men today, they've made mistakes, sure, but I have too. Bigger ones maybe than theirs, and you will too. You're not likely to commit a crime, but you may become blind and refuse to see what you should look at, and that could be worse than a crime. Don't forget that. Never look down on a man, never. If you can't look him, then what's wrong is with you." The world is changing fast. Folks get hurt and make terrible mistakes at such times. But the one I hope you won't make is to cling to my generation's sins. You'll have plenty of your own. Remember, changing things is mighty risky, but not changing things is worse. That is, if you can think of something better to change to. Mama, believe I'll go to bed. You about ready? On the stairs, he stopped. But I don't mean, sister, you got to get radical, he laughed. His voice dropped to the soft tones he used with his younger children. We had a good Christmas, didn't we? He followed our mother up the stairs. My younger sister and I looked in the fire, dreaming about a future we could not know, didn't want to talk about. After a long silence, we succumbed to a little, do you remember about the Christmases of our childhood? And soon we were laughing about how Father used to organize us for the shaking of the pecan trees, and how late around the hearth we cracked the nuts for fruitcakes and saved for Christmas, and the excitement and terror of hog killings on frosty dawns, and the sausages our grandmother made for special Christmas breakfast with just enough red pepper and sage. And now the fire in front of us was blurring. My sister said softly, "It was a large Christmas." "Which one?" I asked. "All of them," she whispered.